I'm Olivia Chen, 34, and I've always been the financial disaster in my mother's eyes. Growing up in the shadow of her practical perfection shaped me in ways I never fully understood until recently. For years, I listened to her predictions about my future, how my creative pursuits would leave me broke and dependent. "You'll never own a home," became her favorite refrain, delivered with that smile that wasn't really a smile. I never imagined the day would come when I'd stand on the porch of her cherished colonial, key in hand, watching the locksmith replace every lock while she was away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Oakridge, a picturesque suburb where property values defined social standing, my childhood home was my mother's pride and possession. A two-story colonial with pristine white columns and a perfectly manicured lawn that my father Thomas maintained with religious dedication every Saturday morning. My earliest memories are tinted with the scent of fresh paint and furniture polish. Nothing in Eleanor Chen's home was ever allowed to appear lived in or worn. "Appearance is reality, Olivia," she'd say, adjusting family photos on the mantel for the third time before guests arrived. "People judge your worth by your surroundings." My younger brother Ethan somehow escaped the weight of her expectations. His practical nature and interest in business and economics aligned perfectly with her values. While I sketched and dreamed, filling notebooks with stories and illustrations, Ethan created spreadsheets and investment plans, earning approving nods and proud introductions at neighborhood gatherings. "This is my son Ethan. He's already investing his allowance in mutual funds," she'd beam, before gesturing vaguely in my direction. "And this is Olivia. She's creative." The word creative dropped from her lips like something slightly distasteful, a character flaw to be tolerated rather than a gift to be nurtured. My father, when present, would squeeze my shoulder and whisper, "The world needs dreamers too, Livy," but never loudly enough for my mother to hear. By 16, I'd transformed my creativity into small acts of rebellion. While maintaining decent grades, I dyed strands of my hair purple, started a school literary magazine, and plastered my bedroom walls with sketches and quotes about artistic passion. Each change to my appearance or pursuit was met with the same disapproving sigh and some variation of, "This won't help you build a stable future, Olivia." The summer before my senior year, I landed a modest scholarship to study graphic design at a state university, not the prestigious business school she'd envisioned for me, but a path toward a creative career I was passionate about. "A partial scholarship," she emphasized at family dinner, picking at her salad, "which means we'll be paying the difference for a degree that won't lead anywhere practical." "Graphic design is practical, Mom," I countered, pushing broccoli around my plate. "Companies need designers for everything. Websites, logos, marketing materials." "Companies need accountants and lawyers," she replied. "They hire designers as an afterthought, and usually freelance. No benefits, no stability, no retirement plan." She turned to my father. "Remember Claudia Wilson's daughter who studied something similar? She's living in a shared apartment with 3 roommates at 32. That night I overheard them arguing about my education." My father's voice, usually soft and accommodating, had an edge I rarely heard. "She deserves our support, Eleanor. Not everyone's path looks like yours." "I'm being realistic," my mother countered. "Someone has to be. Your encouragement is setting her up for disappointment." "Your discouragement is setting her up to doubt herself," he shot back, before the conversation devolved into familiar patterns of tense silence. Despite the tension, they paid the remaining tuition, though every semester came with subtle reminders of the financial burden my choices had created. Gift checks from relatives were sensibly redirected to my education fund rather than allowing me frivolous purchases. Meanwhile, Ethan's business school tuition, significantly higher than mine, was discussed with pride, an investment rather than an expense. College offered my first taste of freedom and validation. Surrounded by other creatives who saw value in my perspective, I thrived, making connections and building a portfolio that prompted my advanced design professor to recommend me for an internship at a boutique marketing agency in the city. "It's unpaid," I explained to my mother over the phone, anticipating her reaction. "But it's with Prism Creative. They work with major clients, and they've hired interns before." "Unpaid?" she repeated flatly. So you'll need more money from us to live in the city for the summer? I've saved from my campus job, I countered, and I can pick up evening shifts at a cafe or something. This could lead to a real job, Mom. Her sigh carried through the phone line, weighted with disappointment. Or it could lead to 3 months of free labor followed by more uncertainty. When does Ethan's paid internship at Goldman start again? I bit back, the sharp response forming on my tongue. June 1st. Same as mine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I took the internship, found a tiny sublet with 2 other interns, and worked evening shifts at a coffee shop to make ends meet. The summer was exhausting but exhilarating. My concepts were included in pitches to actual clients. My name appeared in credits for a small campaign. The creative director mentioned possibilities for future collaboration after graduation. When I returned home briefly before my final semester, I was brimming with stories and achievements, eager to prove my path had merit. My mother listened with what appeared to be polite interest, as I showed her my updated portfolio over breakfast. "This all looks very colorful," she offered, flipping through digital campaigns I'd contributed to. "I suppose there's some demand for this sort of thing." "There's huge demand," I said, trying to keep the defensiveness from my voice. The creative director said my social media concepts increased engagement by 43% for their skincare client. She nodded, clearly unconvinced. "And what's the starting salary for these positions?" I shifted uncomfortably. "It varies by company and location. Entry level might start around 40,000, but with experience." "Ethan's offer is 92,000 plus bonuses," she interrupted, refilling her coffee cup. "And they're helping with relocation to their Chicago office." The comparison hung between us, another measurement by which I'd fallen short. Before I could respond, she continued with practiced casualness. "Have you considered applying to some business positions too? Just as a backup? Your cousin Jennifer works in HR at Meridian Insurance. I'm sure she could pass along your resume." "I don't want a backup plan, Mom," I said quietly. "I want to pursue what I'm good at and what fulfills me." She placed her cup down with deliberate care. "Fulfillment doesn't pay mortgages, Olivia. At the rate you're going, you'll never own a home. Not in this market, not on a designer's salary." She gestured around the immaculate kitchen. "Certainly nothing like this." There it was, the first time she explicitly voiced the prediction that would become her mantra over the coming years. "You'll never own a home." 5 words that somehow encompassed all her disappointment in my choices, all her certainty that my priorities were fundamentally flawed. I returned to campus with her words echoing in my mind, both a burden and, though I didn't realize it yet, a challenge that would shape my future decisions in unexpected ways. Graduation came with mixed emotions. Pride in my accomplishments. I'd been recognized at the department's showcase and had secured a position at a small but growing digital marketing firm in Philadelphia. Anxiety about beginning true adult independence. And a hollow space where parental enthusiasm should have been. My parents attended the ceremony, my father beaming despite my mother's restrained congratulations. The contrast between their reaction to my graduation and Ethan's business school commencement the following weekend was subtle but unmistakable, the difference between polite acknowledgement and genuine celebration. My first apartment was exactly what my mother had feared, a tiny 1-bedroom in a converted industrial building, shared with a college friend to make the rent manageable. The exposed brick and large windows charmed me, but when my parents visited, my mother's tight smile and scanning gaze cataloged every shortcoming. "It's certainly bohemian," she offered, declining to sit on my thrifted sofa. "How's the security in this neighborhood?" "It's fine, Mom. There's key fob entry and security cameras." She nodded, unconvinced. "Well, it's a starter place. Everyone begins somewhere." The implication that this was both beginning and end, that my career choice had condemned me to perpetual rental living, remained unspoken but understood. The next 3 years passed in a blur of professional growth and personal discovery. I moved from junior designer to design lead, managing small campaigns and developing a reputation for innovative approaches to challenger brands. My salary increased modestly but steadily. I started contributing to my 401k, built an emergency fund, and even began setting aside a small amount each month, labeled Someday House, in my budgeting app, a private act of defiance against my mother's prediction. Our relationship settled into a predictable pattern during this time. Monthly phone calls filled with surface-level updates, holiday visits home where my career accomplishments were acknowledged with faint praise, before conversation turned to Ethan's latest promotion or investment success. Occasional maternal suggestions about more lucrative opportunities or reminders that it's never too late to pivot to something more stable. The "you'll never own a home" refrain emerged with increasing frequency, particularly after my parents downsized from our family home to an even more expensive property in a gated community, smaller but more prestigious, with a pool and clubhouse access. The market's only getting worse for first-time buyers, my mother would observe during FaceTime calls, where she showcased new furniture or renovations. Your father and I were lucky to buy when we did. I don't know how young people today will ever manage, especially in creative fields. The summer I turned 30, everything changed. Not in a single dramatic moment, but through a series of events that shifted my perspective, and ultimately my life's direction. It began with unexpected recognition. A campaign I'd conceptualized and led for a sustainable clothing brand went viral, earning industry attention and a prestigious regional advertising award. The success brought a significant promotion, nearly doubling my salary and adding Associate Creative Director to my title. Around the same time, my roommate announced her engagement and plans to move in with her fiancé, leaving me at a crossroads: find another roommate or stretch my budget for the first time to live alone. The decision felt symbolic somehow, a statement about my independence and stability. I chose to live alone, leasing a sun-filled one-bedroom in a slightly better neighborhood. The rent increase was substantial but manageable with my recent promotion. For the first time, I could arrange a space that was entirely mine, decorated with intention rather than necessity. When my parents visited that fall, something had shifted in me. I was no longer the apologetic creative, seeking validation for my choices. I was a successful professional who happened to work in a creative field, confident in my path and my abilities. My mother's assessment of my new apartment followed the usual script. "It's certainly an improvement," she allowed, inspecting the kitchen countertops. "Though still a rental, of course. Did they raise the rent much from the initial lease?" "They will next year, probably," I replied, pouring her tea with steady hands. "But by then, I'll be looking at buying options." She nearly choked on her first sip. "Buying? In this market? On your salary?" I met her gaze directly. "Yes, on my salary. I've been saving systematically for years, Mom. I have a solid down payment fund, excellent credit, and with my promotion, I'm well within range for mortgage approval." "Well," she recovered, setting down her cup, "I suppose some sort of small condo might be possible. Nothing like a proper house, of course, but a starting point." I smiled, letting her assumptions stand without correction. The truth, that I'd already been pre-approved for a loan that could secure a modest but respectable single-family home in several neighborhoods I was researching, remained my private victory. What I didn't know then was that my mother's dismissal of my housing prospects was about to collide with her own changing circumstances in ways neither of us could have predicted. The call came from my father on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in November. His voice sounded thin and unfamiliar, stripped of its usual warmth. "Your mother and I are separating," he said without preamble. "I've moved into a furnished apartment temporarily." The shock rendered me momentarily speechless. In my mind, my parents' marriage had always been stable, if not particularly passionate, a practical partnership that functioned with the same efficiency as everything else in my mother's carefully controlled world. "What happened?" I finally managed, sinking onto my sofa. "Nothing happened," he sighed. "That's part of the problem. We've been living parallel lives for years, Olivia. Since you and Ethan left home, there's been nothing connecting us except habit and appearances." "Does Ethan know?" "I called him first. He's processing." "Your mother hasn't said much to anyone, She's focused on the logistics. Of course she was. Eleanor Chen approached emotional upheaval the way she approached everything else, with spreadsheets and action plans rather than messy feelings. The house? I asked, suddenly realizing the implications. We'll sell it. Neither of us wants to stay there, and it's too large for one person anyway. He paused. Your mother's already contacted a realtor. In the weeks that followed, more details emerged. The separation was indeed mutual, a calm acknowledgement that their relationship had fulfilled its practical purpose, and now, in their early 60s, both wanted different things from their remaining years. My father, to my surprise, spoke of traveling, of writing the historical fiction he'd always enjoyed reading, of a simpler life unburdened by appearance and status. My mother remained characteristically focused on financial arrangements and property division, ensuring her standard of living would continue uninterrupted. The house, their second property together and my mother's pride for the past 7 years, was officially listed in January. Market conditions were less favorable than when they'd purchased it, and their realtor advised a quick sale, even if it meant a slight reduction from their ideal asking price. I followed the listing online, viewing the professional photographs of spaces I'd never felt comfortable in. Too perfect, too curated, designed to impress rather than welcome. Despite this emotional distance, seeing the for sale sign in the listing photos stirred unexpected feelings. This house represented my mother's values, her definition of success, her carefully constructed life that was now, like my parents' marriage, being dismantled. During our weekly call, my mother mentioned the listing with forced casualness. The first open house is this weekend. Patricia thinks it should move quickly despite the market. What are your plans after it sells? I asked, genuinely curious about her vision for this unexpected new chapter. I'm looking at luxury condominiums in the Riverside development, she replied. Less maintenance, excellent security, and the property values continue to appreciate despite market fluctuations. Of course. Even in transition, her priorities remained unchanged: practical considerations, financial stability, and maintaining appearances. And you? She asked, with what seemed like actual interest. How is your housing search progressing? The hesitation before housing search conveyed her lingering skepticism, her certainty that my ambitions exceeded my capabilities. It's going well, I answered truthfully. I've been touring properties in a few different neighborhoods, getting a feel for what's available in my price range. She responded, and I could picture her expression, lips slightly pursed, eyebrows raised. Well, don't rush into anything. The market might improve for buyers if you wait. The familiar refrain, delay, reconsider, lower your expectations, no longer held the power it once did. I was viewing another property that weekend, a 1940s bungalow with original hardwood floors and a surprisingly large backyard. It needed updates but had solid bones and was well within my budget in an emerging neighborhood. What I didn't share with my mother, what I couldn't have possibly anticipated myself, was how our separate housing journeys were about to intersect in a way that would permanently alter our relationship. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected call from my father. His voice carried an unusual urgency. Have you seen the listing for your mother's house? He asked without greeting. I've been following it online, I confirmed. Has there been an offer? The price was reduced significantly yesterday. There's been less interest than anticipated, and your mother is… He paused, searching for the right word. Anxious to proceed with her plans for the new condominium. My browser was already open to the property site, refreshing to see the updated listing. The price reduction was indeed substantial, nearly 15% below the original asking price and now, remarkably, at the upper edge of what my mortgage pre-approval could accommodate. That's significant, I managed, my mind racing with possibilities that had never before seemed within reach. Patricia mentioned they've had feedback about the kitchen being outdated and some concerns about the HVAC system, my father continued. Apparently, buyers in that price range expect everything to be recently updated. The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother's showcase home, her symbol of success and status, was being critiqued as insufficient by the very people whose approval she had always sought. Olivia, my father said, his tone shifting to something more tentative. This might sound strange, but have you considered it? Considered what? The house. Your mother's house. The words hung between us, absurd, yet somehow perfect in their symmetry. With the price reduction, it might be within your range now. And I know you've been looking. Dad, that's… I started, then stopped, unsure how to articulate the tangle of emotions his suggestion had triggered. Mom would never sell her house to me. Why not? It would be a clean, quick sale. No inspection contingencies since you know the property. No realtor commission if you approached her directly. Because, I said slowly, the reality of our relationship settling heavily, she doesn't believe I can afford it. She doesn't believe I should have it. She spent years telling me I'll never own a home, especially not one like hers. The silence that followed acknowledged the truth of my words. Maybe, my father finally said, that's exactly why you should buy it. After we hung up, I sat motionless, staring at the listing photos of my mother's immaculate house, the formal living room where I'd always felt I might stain something irreplaceable. The showcase kitchen where meals were prepared with precision rather than joy. The manicured backyard where spontaneity was sacrificed for appearance. I'd never wanted this house, with its perfection and pretension. Yet something about my father's suggestion resonated on a level beyond logic or practicality. There was a poetic justice to it. The daughter who would never own a home, purchasing the very symbol of her mother's definition of success. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I created a detailed financial analysis of the purchase, not to convince myself it was possible, I already knew it was, barely, but to prepare for the conversation I needed to have with my mother. Every number, every calculation, every projection had to be irrefutable. This wouldn't be an emotional appeal, but a business proposition. I called my mother the following evening, my documentation prepared, my resolve steady. I saw the price reduction on the house, I said after our usual perfunctory exchanges. Yes, she sighed. The market is challenging right now. Patricia says buyers are being particularly demanding about updates and renovations. I'm interested in purchasing it, I stated simply, my voice calmer than I felt. The silence that followed stretched long enough that I checked to ensure the call hadn't disconnected. That's not funny, Olivia, she finally responded, her tone sharp. It's not a joke, I countered. I've been pre-approved for a mortgage that would cover the current asking price. I have the down payment ready, and I'm familiar with the property, which simplifies the process considerably. Another silence, shorter this time. You can't afford this house. Actually, I can. My financial situation has changed substantially over the past year. I'd be happy to share the details of my pre-approval and financials. This isn't some starter home or urban apartment, Olivia. This is a significant property with substantial ongoing maintenance costs, property taxes, all of which I've calculated and factored into my budget, I interrupted, my confidence growing. I'm not making this offer impulsively, Mom. I've done my due diligence. I could almost hear her recalibrating, adjusting to this unexpected challenge to her long-held narrative about my capabilities and future. Why would you want this house? She finally asked, genuine confusion in her voice. It's never been your style. The question caught me off guard. I had prepared for financial objections, for dismissal of my capability, but not for this simple inquiry that cut to the heart of my motivation. You're right, I admitted. It's not my style. But it's a sound investment in a desirable neighborhood. And I hesitated, then decided on honesty. There's a certain symmetry to it that appeals to me. Symmetry, she repeated flatly. For years, you've told me I'd never own a home, that my career choice had guaranteed a lifetime of renting, of financial insecurity. Buying this house feels like closing a circle. My honesty hung between us, too raw and real for our usual careful conversations. I see, she said finally. Well, if you're serious, I'll need to discuss this with Patricia. There are procedures, even for family sales. Of course, I agreed, recognizing that this conditional acceptance was as close to enthusiasm as I could expect. I can connect my mortgage broker with her directly if that helps. After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence. the magnitude of what I'd just initiated washing over me. I wasn't just purchasing a house. I was challenging a fundamental dynamic in my relationship with my mother. I was rewriting a narrative she had crafted about my capabilities and future. The process moved with surprising speed after that initial conversation. My mother, ever practical, recognized the advantages of a direct sale. No additional price reductions, no more open houses, no realtor commission. Within 3 weeks, we had a purchase agreement drawn up by a real estate attorney, specifying the terms of our transaction with the clinical precision my mother valued. Throughout the process, she maintained a careful emotional distance, treating me more like an unfamiliar buyer than her daughter. Questions about my plans for the property were met with vague responses. I wasn't ready to share my vision for transforming her showcase home into something that actually felt like home to me. The closing date was set for March 15th, coinciding with my mother's planned move to her new condominium. The timing would allow her to transition directly without an interim housing arrangement. As the date approached, a strange tension developed between us. Each conversation about logistics or paperwork seemed weighted with unspoken emotions. My mother's usual critiques and suggestions tapered off, replaced by an uncharacteristic reticence. 2 days before the closing, she called with an unexpected request. "I'll need an extra week in the house after closing," she announced without preamble. "There have been delays with the condominium renovations. The purchase agreement specifies vacant possession at closing," I reminded her, the formal language feeling strange when discussing arrangements with my own mother. "Yes, well, circumstances change. It's only a week, Olivia. Surely you can be flexible." Something in her tone, the familiar expectation that her needs would take precedence, that rules were adaptable when they inconvenienced her, triggered a clarity I hadn't anticipated. "I have contractors scheduled to begin work the day after closing," I said, the lie coming easily. "Painting, flooring, refinishing, kitchen updates. Everything's been coordinated based on the agreed timeline." "Reschedule them," she replied dismissively. "These things happen all the time." "No," I said simply. The silence that followed held a different quality than our previous pauses. Not confusion or recalculation, but genuine shock. "What did you say?" she finally asked. I said no. "The closing proceeds as scheduled, with vacant possession as agreed. You'll need to make alternative arrangements if your new place isn't ready." "I'm your mother, Olivia. After everything I've done for you." "This is a business transaction," I interrupted, surprising myself with my steadiness. "We both signed a legal agreement with specific terms. I'm holding to those terms." After she hung up abruptly, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by packed boxes, a strange calm settling over me. This wasn't about a week's delay or contractor schedules. This was about boundaries, about establishing from the beginning that our relationship within the context of this house would be different than before. The closing proceeded as scheduled on March 15th. My mother attended with her attorney, her expression carefully neutral as we signed the necessary documents. My father, though not required to be present since his name had been removed from the deed during the divorce settlement, waited in the lobby to offer moral support. "Congratulations," the closing attorney said, handing me the keys to my mother's, no, my house. "You're officially a homeowner." My mother's lips tightened slightly at his words, the physical manifestation of her disproven prediction lingering between us. "I'll be out by 5 o'clock, she said stiffly as we exited the conference room. "My movers are scheduled for 2. "I'll plan to arrive around 6 then," I replied, "to give you plenty of time." My father embraced me in the parking lot, whispering, "I'm proud of you, Livy," before we went our separate ways, he to his new apartment, I to finish packing my remaining belongings, and my mother to oversee the emptying of the house that had defined her status and identity. What happened next was not part of any plan or strategy. It wasn't a calculated move in the complex chess game of our relationship. It was instead an intuitive response to a lifetime of boundary violations and emotional manipulation. I arrived at the house, my house, at precisely 6 o'clock that evening. The driveway was empty, the moving truck gone. Through the large front windows, I could see that the main rooms had been cleared of furniture, leaving only the echo of my mother's presence in the immaculate condition of the space. As I approached the front door, key in hand, I noticed a note taped to the ornate knocker. Had to leave a few things in the garage. Will collect tomorrow morning. Front door code is still the same. No signature, no pleasantry, just the expectation that her continued access to the property was a given. I stood on the porch, keys suspended between my fingers, as a lifetime of similar assumptions and expectations flashed through my mind. The unspoken rule that her convenience outweighed my boundaries. The certainty that her priorities would always take precedence. Without fully processing my decision, I pulled out my phone and made a call. Summit Security Locksmith, a cheerful voice answered. How can we help you? I need all the locks changed at my new house, I heard myself say. Today, if possible. Emergency service. We have a technician available who could be there within the hour. There's an additional fee for same-day service. That's fine, I replied, a sense of calm purpose settling over me. I'll pay whatever it costs. As I ended the call, I realized I was smiling. Not from malice or vindictiveness, but from the pure, clean feeling of finally establishing a boundary that couldn't be crossed or negotiated away. The locksmith arrived 40 minutes later, a friendly middle-aged man named Ray, who asked no questions about my urgency, simply set to work replacing the locks on the front door, back door, and internal door connecting the house to the garage. New keys for a new beginning, he said cheerfully, handing me the set of freshly cut keys. No one's getting in unless you want them to now. As his van pulled away from the curb, I stood in the doorway of my home, truly mine now, secured against unwanted entry or influence, and felt a profound shift in my understanding of both property and self-worth. My phone buzzed with an incoming text from my mother. Left some boxes clearly marked in garage. Will collect 9 a.m. tomorrow. No request, no acknowledgement that she would be entering my property. Just the continuation of a lifelong pattern of assumed access and control. I waited until morning to respond, wanting my decision to be deliberate rather than reactive. At 8:30 a.m., I texted back, "The locks have been changed for security purposes. Let me know when you plan to come, and I'll ensure I'm available to provide access." Her response was immediate and incredulous. "You changed the locks? On your mother? After one day?" "Yes," I typed simply. "This is my home now. Access is by invitation." The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times, indicating multiple drafted and deleted responses. Finally, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. I expect you to be present." When she arrived, her luxury SUV pulling sharply into the driveway, her expression was thunderous. I met her at the front door, key in hand, my resolve steady, despite the familiar flutter of anxiety her disapproval still triggered. "This is completely unnecessary, and frankly hurtful," she began, as I unlocked the door. "What did you think I was going to do? Steal back my own furniture?" "Not your furniture anymore," I corrected gently, leading her toward the garage. "And this isn't about theft. It's about boundaries." She scoffed, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. Boundaries. Such a trendy therapy term. In my day, we called it basic respect for one's parents. I paused, turning to face her directly. "Respect works both ways, Mom. You've spent years telling me what I couldn't achieve, what wasn't possible for me. You've dismissed my career, my choices, my capabilities. And even now, you assumed you could maintain access to this house on your terms." "I left a few boxes," she protested, gesturing toward the garage door. "Hardly a major imposition. It's not about the boxes, it's about the assumption, the expectation that your convenience outweighs my ownership." I unlocked the garage door. "Your boxes are there on the left." She moved past me, her posture rigid with indignation. The boxes, 3 medium-sized containers neatly labeled Eleanor's personal items, sat exactly where she'd left them. "You've made your point," she said stiffly, lifting the smallest box. "Though I must say, I'm disappointed by this pettiness." "It's not pettiness, Mom. It's a reset." I picked up one of the remaining boxes. "We're establishing a new dynamic. One where my home is actually mine, my boundaries are respected, And my achievements aren't dismissed. Something flickered across her face then. Not understanding exactly, but perhaps the first recognition that something fundamental had shifted between us. "I never dismissed your achievements," she said, her voice less certain than before. "You'll never own a home," I quoted softly. "How many times have you said that to me over the years? How many ways have you communicated that my choice is guaranteed failure by your definition of success?" She didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the boxes rather than meeting my eyes. We loaded the containers into her SUV in silence, the weight of unspoken history hanging between us. As she closed the trunk, she finally looked at me directly. "So what happens now?" she asked, and for the first time in my adult life, I heard genuine uncertainty in her voice. I considered her question carefully, understanding its layers and implications. "Now I make this house my own," I said, "and you and I learn a new way of relating to each other. One based on mutual respect, rather than your expectations or my need for approval." "And if I don't know how to do that?" The vulnerability in her question caught me off guard. "Then we figure it out together," I offered. Slowly. With boundaries and honesty. She nodded once, a brisk movement that acknowledged my words without quite accepting them. As she opened her car door, she paused, looking back at the house. Her former showcase, now my blank canvas. "What will you do with it?" she asked, genuine curiosity breaking through her composure. "The house?" I smiled, feeling the weight of possibility in my answer. "I'm going to make it a home, Mom." My kind of home. As I watched her drive away, keys heavy in my pocket, I turned back to face the house, my house, with its pristine exterior and empty rooms waiting to be filled with color, creativity, and life on my terms. The journey that had begun with her dismissive, "You'll never own a home," had led me here, to ownership not just of property, but of my narrative and worth. The locks had been changed, yes, but the more significant change was within me. The unshakable knowledge that I was capable of creating boundaries, challenging limiting beliefs, and building a life that reflected my values rather than someone else's definition of success. If you're watching from somewhere dealing with people who underestimate you or try to define your potential, remember that sometimes the most powerful response isn't arguing or proving them wrong with words. It's quietly, steadily building the life they said you couldn't have, then changing the locks, metaphorically or literally, on their ability to undermine your achievements. The Meridian healthcare position changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't just a homeowner stretching to make mortgage payments. I was a creative professional with genuine financial security. The salary increase meant I could accelerate my home renovations and still build a robust savings account, something my mother had always insisted would be impossible in my impractical career path. My first major project was transforming the backyard. My mother's formal garden, with its geometric precision and high-maintenance roses, had always seemed designed more for show than enjoyment. I envisioned something entirely different, a space that blended beauty with functionality, wildness with intention. "You're going to remove the rose garden?" my father asked one Saturday morning as we stood surveying the space, coffee mugs in hand. "Your mother won a neighborhood award for those roses 3 years running." "I know," I nodded, sipping my coffee, "but they require so much chemical intervention to look perfect. I'm thinking native plants, pollinator-friendly flowers, maybe a small vegetable garden. Something that works with nature instead of forcing it into submission." He laughed softly. A perfect metaphor if I ever heard one. I hired a landscape designer specializing in sustainable gardens, working closely with her to create a space that would attract birds and butterflies while requiring minimal maintenance. Together we sketched plans for meandering pathways, a small meditation area beneath the old oak tree, and raised beds for growing herbs and vegetables. When the crew arrived to begin the transformation, removing the regimented boxwood hedges and relocating the prized roses to a smaller, dedicated area, I felt a momentary pang of doubt. Was I erasing too much of the home's history, too much of my mother's imprint? The landscape designer, sensing my hesitation, placed a hand on my arm. "Gardens are living things, Olivia. They're meant to evolve, to change with their caretakers. You're not erasing the past. You're allowing the land to move forward under your stewardship." Her words resonated beyond the garden, touching something deeper about my relationship with this house, with my mother, with my own identity. I wasn't obliterating what came before, but building upon it, allowing space for something new to emerge that honored the foundation while creating room for growth. As summer progressed, so did my career at Meridian. My fresh perspective and willingness to challenge conventional healthcare marketing approaches earned recognition from leadership. 3 months into my position, I was asked to present our rebranding strategy at a national healthcare conference, a significant opportunity for both professional visibility and networking. The night before my departure for the conference in Chicago, I received an unexpected text from my mother. Saw the Meridian billboard on Highway 9. The typography is distinctive. Your work? I stared at the message, surprised both by her recognition of my professional contribution and her initiative in reaching out. Yes, I typed back. Part of the new brand identity rollout. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared as she drafted and redrafted her response. Finally, clean design. Very effective. From my mother, this constituted effusive praise. I sat on my newly built deck overlooking the half-transformed garden, absorbing this small but significant shift in our dynamic. For the first time in my memory, she had noticed my work not to criticize or question, but simply to acknowledge its quality. Thank you, I replied, then added, heading to Chicago tomorrow to present the campaign at a healthcare marketing conference. Safe travels, she wrote back immediately. They're fortunate to have you representing them. I nearly dropped my phone. An unqualified compliment from Eleanor Chen was rarer than a solar eclipse. As I packed that evening, her words kept replaying in my mind, creating a strange mixture of validation and disorientation. Had buying her house and changing the locks somehow altered the fundamental dynamic between us? Or was this change coming from within her, a gradual recognition that her narrative about my capabilities had been fundamentally flawed? The Chicago conference proved to be a pivotal moment in my career. My presentation on humanizing healthcare branding through authentic visual storytelling resonated strongly with the audience of marketing executives and healthcare administrators. Afterward, I found myself surrounded by peers asking questions, exchanging contact information, inviting me to speak at their organizations. Among them was Julian Mercer, Chief Marketing Officer for a prestigious healthcare network based in San Francisco. Your approach is exactly what we've been searching for, he said, handing me his card. We should talk about some consulting possibilities when you have time. I returned home energized by the recognition and opportunities, only to find an even more surprising development awaiting me. A large envelope had been delivered in my absence, my mother's precise handwriting on the address label. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 1992, a small article featuring a student art exhibition at my elementary school. A photograph showed a row of children's artwork with a tiny version of me standing proudly beside a colorful abstract painting. A yellow sticky note in my mother's handwriting was attached to the clipping, found while organizing old files. Thought you might want it for your studio wall. Beneath the clipping was a folder containing more preserved mementos, certificates from art competitions I'd forgotten entering, a program from a high school exhibition where I'd received honorable mention, even a carefully pressed flower from the corsage I'd worn to a design school formal. All these years, while verbally dismissing my creative pursuits, my mother had been silently preserving evidence of my artistic journey. I sat on my living room floor surrounded by these artifacts of a maternal attention I'd never recognized, trying to reconcile this revelation with the critical, dismissive mother I'd grown up with. Had she always seen me more clearly than I'd believed? Had her preservation of these mementos been an acknowledgement she couldn't verbally express? The doorbell interrupted my contemplation. Through the peephole, I was surprised to see Ethan, my younger brother, shifting awkwardly on the porch. Hey, he said when I opened the door, hands shoved in his pockets. I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd finally check out your place. Our relationship had grown distant over the years, shaped by our mother's obvious favoritism and our divergent paths. While we maintained cordial holiday interactions and occasional text exchanges, we hadn't had a meaningful conversation in years. Come in? I invited, suddenly eager to share my transformed space with someone who had known its previous incarnation intimately. Ethan wandered through the house, his expression shifting from guarded to genuinely impressed as he took in the changes. "It's so different," he said finally, accepting the beer I offered as we settled in the newly furnished living room. "But in a good way. It feels alive now." "That's exactly what I was going for," I nodded, pleased by his perception. "Mom's been different lately," he said abruptly, picking at the label on his beer bottle. "Less critical, more reflective. Dad thinks it's the divorce, but I think it might be this," he gestured around the house. "You challenging her narrative so completely." I considered this possibility, recalling the newspaper clippings, the unexpected text messages, the subtle shifts in our interactions. "Maybe," I acknowledged. "Or maybe she's finally recognizing that success doesn't have to look like her vision of it." Ethan laughed, a short, surprised sound. "You know what she said to me last week? She asked if I was actually happy in finance, or if I'd chosen it to please her. Can you imagine? After pushing me in that direction my entire life, she suddenly wonders if it was my authentic choice." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Our mother's rigid definitions of success had shaped both our paths, mine through resistance, his through compliance. Now, somehow, she was questioning the very framework she'd constructed so carefully. "What did you tell her?" I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged, looking suddenly younger, more vulnerable. "I told her I didn't know anymore. That I'm good at finance, but I've never loved it the way you love design." A pause then. "I told her I've been taking night classes in architectural design. That I might want to transition eventually." "Ethan! That's huge," I exclaimed, genuinely surprised and impressed. "How did she react?" "That's the strangest part," he said, shaking his head slightly in lingering disbelief. "She offered to connect me with her interior designer friend, who works with several architectural firms. Said it's never too late to follow a more fulfilling path." We sat in stunned silence, absorbing the seismic shift this represented in our mother's worldview. The woman who had relentlessly pushed us toward her narrow definition of success was now actively supporting a creative career pivot for her golden child. "Something's definitely changed in her," I murmured. "Maybe something changed in all of us," Ethan suggested, looking around at the house that had once embodied our mother's values and now reflected mine instead. As summer transitioned to fall, my garden began to take shape, native plants establishing themselves where formal rose bushes had once reigned. Inside, each room had been transformed to reflect my aesthetic and needs, though certain architectural elements, the crown molding my mother had specially commissioned, the hand-carved banister my father had restored, remained as respectful nods to the home's history. My professional life flourished alongside these physical transformations. The connections made at the Chicago conference led to speaking engagements and consulting opportunities that supplemented my Meridian salary. Suddenly, the financial stability my mother had insisted would forever elude me in a creative career was not only achieved but exceeded. In October, 6 months after changing the locks, I decided to host a dinner party to celebrate both the house transformation and my career milestone. The guest list included close friends, colleagues from Meridian, and, after considerable deliberation, my parents, invited separately but informed of the others' attendance. The evening of the party arrived with perfect fall weather, crisp enough for the fireplace but mild enough for guests to wander through the garden with glasses of wine. I'd prepared most of the food myself, supplemented by contributions from friends and a spectacular dessert from my favorite local bakery. My father arrived first, bearing a bottle of champagne and beaming with pride as he took in the fully realized transformation of the space. "It's perfect, Livy," he said, embracing me. "Completely and authentically you." Guests arrived steadily after that. Zoe and Marco, colleagues from Meridian, friends from my design school days. Ethan came with his new girlfriend, an art teacher whose creative energy complemented his more reserved nature. The house filled with conversation and laughter, exactly as I'd envisioned when reimagining the formerly sterile spaces as places for genuine connection. My mother arrived precisely at the invited time, neither early nor late, dressed with her usual impeccable taste but notably without the formal rigidity that had once characterized her social appearances. She carried a carefully wrapped package and a bottle of wine. "Your garden is establishing nicely," she observed as I greeted her at the door, her tone neutral but not critical. The native plants were a good choice for this exposure. "Thank you," I replied, accepting both her assessment and the gift she extended. "I'm glad you could come." Inside, she moved through the space with measured steps, noting the changes with careful observation rather than immediate judgment. When she encountered my father by the fireplace, their greeting was civil, even warm, the tension of their separation seemingly eased by time and separate peace. The evening progressed with a natural flow, conversation moving from politics to art to technology, as guests mingled through rooms now designed for exactly this purpose, genuine human connection rather than staged perfection. I moved between groups, refilling glasses, introducing people with shared interests, occasionally catching glimpses of my mother engaged in what appeared to be genuine conversation with my creative colleagues. After dinner, as guests settled in the living room with dessert and coffee, Zoe tapped her glass for attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, raising her wine glass. "To Olivia, who not only proved that artists can indeed own homes, but who had the courage to transform a space of judgment into a sanctuary of creativity and authenticity." Glasses raised around the room, faces warm with affection and agreement. My gaze caught my mother's across the space, expecting discomfort or offense at Zoe's pointed reference to her past criticisms. Instead, I found her watching me with an expression I couldn't immediately interpret, something complex that held acknowledgement, regret, and perhaps a hint of admiration. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, my mother lingered, examining the framed creative awards now displayed in the hallway where her formal family portraits had once hung. I approached hesitantly, wine glass in hand, uncertain what this moment of private scrutiny might reveal. "Your great-grandmother would have been pleased," she said without turning, still studying the evidence of my professional recognition. "She never had the opportunity to see her creativity validated this way." "I wish I could have known her," I replied, joining her before the display. "She would have understood you better than I did," my mother admitted, the words clearly difficult for her to voice. "Better than I tried to." The acknowledgement hung between us. Not quite an apology, but something equally meaningful in its honesty. "Would you like to see what I did with her watercolor?" I asked, offering an opening toward continued conversation rather than closure. She nodded, following me upstairs to the master bedroom, where the inherited painting now hung in a place of honor, morning light designed to catch its delicate colors. The room itself had been transformed from her formal, untouchable showcase to my personal sanctuary. Walls, now a soothing sage green, bed dressed in mismatched linen, books stacked on nightstands, a small meditation area created in the bay window. "It suits the space," she observed, studying how the painting worked with my design choices. "Better than it ever looked in my office." "It felt important to display it properly," I explained, to acknowledge that creative lineage. Something shifted in her expression then, a softening around eyes that had always seemed to evaluate rather than simply see. "When you were about 5, she said unexpectedly, gaze still fixed on the watercolor, "you covered an entire wall of your bedroom in crayon drawings, while I was at a charity luncheon. Not scribbles, actual detailed pictures of our family, the house, the neighborhood dogs. Your father found me standing in your doorway, completely speechless." I had no memory of this incident but could easily imagine her horror at such creative defacement. "I told him to paint over it immediately," she continued. "He refused, said it was genuine artistic expression and should be preserved." A small, rueful smile touched her lips. "We argued about it for 3 days. He finally convinced me to photograph the wall before repainting. I still have those photographs somewhere." The revelation of this long-ago battle over my creativity, and my father's early recognition and defense of my artistic expression, filled in another piece of the complex family dynamic that had shaped me. "Dad never told me that story," I said quietly. "No, he wouldn't have," she acknowledged. "He was always careful not to position himself as the good parent against me as the bad parent, even when I probably deserved it." This level of self-awareness from my mother was unprecedented in my experience. I studied her profile, noting for the first time the subtle signs of aging I'd been too defensive to observe before. The fine lines around her eyes, the slight softening beneath her jaw, the careful way she held herself to mask the joint pain she'd never acknowledge. "I got it wrong, Olivia," she said finally, turning to face me directly. "About you. About what success looks like. About what matters." The admission, so simple yet so profound, seemed to cost her considerable effort, decades of certainty and judgment compressed into those few words. "Why now?" I asked, genuinely curious about the timing of this shift. "What changed?" She gestured vaguely around the room, encompassing not just the physical space but everything it represented. "This, partly. Seeing you succeed by every metric, financial, professional, personal, while remaining true to yourself. It's humbling." She moved toward the window, looking out at the garden now visible in the landscape lighting. "And partly losing your father. Not just the divorce, but realizing how much of our life together was shaped by my rigid expectations. How much joy we might have had if I'd been more flexible, more accepting of different definitions of a good life." The vulnerability in this admission was so uncharacteristic that I found myself without an immediate response, caught between old defensive patterns and the possibility of a new, more authentic connection. "It's not too late, you know," I finally said, "to redefine your own metrics for a good life." She turned from the window, studying me with that familiar analytical gaze, but without its usual critical edge. "No," she agreed after a moment, "it's not too late, for either of us." When she departed an hour later, the last guest to leave, our goodbye held none of the familiar tension of previous partings. No critical parting shots, no subtle undermining of my choices, just a simple acknowledgement of the evening's success and a tentative plan for lunch the following week. Standing in my doorway, watching her car disappear down the street, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Not forgiveness exactly, or complete reconciliation, but perhaps the beginning of a new understanding between us. The recognition that while our past couldn't be rewritten, our future relationship remained uncharted territory, open to new possibilities. Inside, I moved through rooms now quiet after hours of lively conversation, extinguishing candles, gathering abandoned wine glasses, savoring the evidence of genuine connection and celebration. In the kitchen, I discovered the package my mother had brought, still unwrapped in the evening's busy flow. Carefully removing the elegant paper, I found a leather-bound book, with no title on its cover. Opening it revealed a collection of photographs, not formal portraits but candid moments spanning decades. My childhood art projects, school performances, college graduation, early professional accomplishments, recent press coverage of my work for Meridian. On the inside cover, a single sentence in my mother's precise handwriting. "I may not have always understood your path, but I never stopped watching you walk it." The evidence of this silent witnessing, so at odds with her verbal dismissals of my choices, brought unexpected tears. Had she always been proud in some private, unexpressed way? Had her criticism been misguided protection rather than rejection? Or was this collection an after-the-fact reconstruction, a rewriting of her emotional history with me? Perhaps the specific answer mattered less than the gesture itself. The acknowledgement that my journey had value worthy of documentation, that my creativity had always been an essential part of who I was, not a phase to outgrow or a limitation to overcome. I placed the album on my coffee table, where morning light would catch its leather binding, making it part of my home's new narrative. Not hidden away like her private collection of my accomplishments had been, but displayed openly as evidence of a relationship in transformation. That night, I slept deeply in the house that had once represented everything I thought I couldn't have. Financial success, family approval, established roots. Now it embodied something far more valuable: the courage to define success on my own terms, to create boundaries that protected my authenticity, to transform spaces both physical and emotional into reflections of my true self. The locks I'd changed had secured more than just physical entry. They had established a fundamental truth about ownership, not just of property but of narrative, of identity, of the right to determine what constitutes a meaningful life. In the morning, I woke to sunlight filtering through curtains I'd chosen, in a room painted colors that soothed my spirit, surrounded by objects that held meaning rather than mere status. Through the window, I could see birds gathering in the native garden, life thriving in spaces once controlled for appearance rather than vitality. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, Julian Mercer from the Chicago conference, following up on his interest in having me consult for his San Francisco healthcare network. The opportunity would mean significant additional income, expanded professional recognition, and the chance to influence healthcare marketing on a national scale. As I considered his offer, sitting in the kitchen that had once been my mother's showcase and was now my creative heart, I realized how profoundly my relationship with success had evolved. No longer was I driven by the need to prove my mother wrong or validate my choices in her eyes. Instead, I could evaluate opportunities based on their alignment with my values, their potential for creative fulfillment, their capacity to contribute meaningful work to the world. I texted Julian back, expressing interest and suggesting a video call to discuss possibilities. Then I messaged Zoe. Breakfast on my deck in an hour? Have exciting news to share. Moving through my home, truly mine now in every sense. I felt a deep settlement, a rightness that transcended property ownership. The journey from "you'll never own a home" to this moment of complete belonging had been about so much more than real estate. It had been about reclaiming the authority to write my own story, to define my own metrics for success, to create boundaries that protected my authentic self. And perhaps most importantly, it had been about recognizing that true ownership begins not with keys and deeds, but with the courage to challenge limiting narratives and create new possibilities previously thought impossible. As I stepped onto my deck, morning coffee in hand, watching sunlight illuminate the garden's transformation from rigid formality to thriving natural beauty, I understood that changing the locks had been just the beginning. The real transformation had been internal, the unshakable knowledge that I was the rightful owner not just of this house, but of my choices, my creativity, my definition of a life well lived. A year after buying my mother's house and changing the locks, I stood in my transformed backyard hosting a garden party that would have been unimaginable in the previous incarnation of this space. Where once perfectly manicured rose bushes had stood in regimented rows, now native wildflowers swayed in the autumn breeze, attracting butterflies and hummingbirds. The formal stone patio had been expanded into a more organic gathering space, with a fire pit surrounded by Adirondack chairs made from reclaimed wood. My guests, a diverse mix of colleagues, neighbors, creative collaborators, and family, mingled comfortably, moving between conversation clusters, with the ease that comes from feeling genuinely welcome in a space designed for connection rather than impression. "I can't believe this is the same yard where your mother used to host those stuffy garden club meetings," Zoe commented, accepting a glass of sangria from the beverage station we'd set up beneath the oak tree. "Remember how we weren't allowed to walk on the grass during those events?" I laughed, the memory no longer carrying its former sting. "The transformation isn't just physical," I replied, gesturing toward the far corner of the yard where, remarkably, my mother was engaged in animated conversation with Julian Mercer, my San Francisco client who had flown in specifically for this gathering. Following my successful consulting project for his healthcare network, Julian had convinced his board to create a new position, Chief Brand Storyteller, and had offered it to me just last week. The role would mean dividing my time between my home base and quarterly trips to California, with a compensation package that would have seemed impossible to the younger version of myself who had internalized my mother's financial predictions. "Is she actually laughing?" Zoe squinted in my mother's direction, genuine surprise in her voice. "Apparently Julian's mother serves on the same Arts Foundation board as one of her friends," I explained. "They're discovering they have mutual connections." The evolution in my relationship with my mother had been gradual, but profound over the past year. After our breakthrough conversation the night of my dinner party, we had begun establishing a new dynamic. Not the instant warmth of a Hallmark movie reconciliation, but something more nuanced and ultimately more authentic. Our weekly lunches had become a space for careful discovery, each of us cautiously revealing aspects of ourselves previously hidden behind roles and expectations. I learned about her early interest in interior design, abandoned for the more practical path of business administration. She heard about my creative process, my professional challenges, my vision for projects beyond Meridian. "Your mother just recommended my portfolio to the hospital board chairman's wife," my former design school classmate Maya reported, joining Zoe and me by the beverage station. Apparently, they're renovating their vacation home and need comprehensive design services. Did you slip something into her drink? I smiled, watching my mother across the yard. She's coming to recognize creative work as valuable on its own terms, not just as a hobby or indulgence. Miracles never cease, Maya replied, raising her glass in a mock toast. My father approached, accompanied by his new partner Patricia, a children's book illustrator, whose gentle creativity had brought a softening influence to his post-divorce life. The transformation of this place continues to amaze me, he said, embracing me briefly. Both the physical space and the energy within it. That's exactly what I was aiming for, I acknowledged. A place that feels alive rather than preserved, if that makes sense. Perfect sense, Patricia nodded, her artist's eye taking in the intentional wildness of the garden. You've created a space that breathes with possibility rather than restraint. As the afternoon progressed into evening, twinkling lights activated on timers throughout the garden, creating a magical atmosphere as darkness fell. Conversations deepened, laughter flowed more freely, and the gathering took on that special quality that comes when people feel genuinely comfortable to be themselves. I circulated among my guests, refilling glasses, introducing people with shared interests, occasionally catching my mother's observant gaze from across the space. In these moments, I recognized something I'd never seen during my childhood. Not approval exactly, but perhaps a dawning appreciation for a way of being in the world different from her own carefully controlled existence. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Julian pulled me aside near the kitchen door. I've been meaning to tell you, he said, lowering his voice slightly. Your mother had some fascinating insights about our senior patient outreach materials. She mentioned that the font size and contrast ratio might be problematic for the demographic we're targeting. I couldn't help but laugh. Once a perfectionist, always a perfectionist. But she's not wrong. Not at all, he agreed. In fact, I'd like to incorporate her feedback into our next revision. She has a remarkable eye for detail. After seeing Julian to his rental car, I returned to find my mother in the kitchen, quietly loading the dishwasher with a precision that brought a wave of nostalgia. Some habits, it seemed, were too deeply ingrained to evolve. You don't need to do that, I said, setting down a tray of empty glasses on the counter. I can handle cleanup tomorrow. I know, she replied, continuing her methodical stacking. But it gives me something useful to do while we talk. The statement, so different from her former insistence on immediate order, represented yet another small shift in her approach to control and perfection. Julian mentioned you had some thoughts about their patient materials, I said, leaning against the counter. The typographic hierarchy needs reconsideration, she nodded, rinsing a serving platter. And the color palette, while aesthetically pleasing, lacks sufficient contrast for older eyes. Simple adjustments would make it more functional, without sacrificing design integrity. I studied her profile as she worked, noting how her critical assessment now came paired with constructive suggestions rather than dismissive judgment. You know, I said carefully, you have a natural eye for this kind of thing. You always have. She paused, hands stilling in the soapy water. I wanted to study interior design, originally, before business school. I remember you mentioning that, I nodded. What stopped you? My father, she replied, resuming her methodical washing. He had very firm ideas about practical career paths for women in his generation. Business administration offered better marriage prospects than creative fields. The parallel to our own history hung unspoken between us, her replication of her father's practical expectations, my resistance echoing her own suppressed creative aspirations. It's not too late, you know, I ventured, echoing words I'd spoken to her months earlier. Many design programs offer continuing education courses for professionals looking to transition or expand their skills. She looked up then, genuine surprise in her expression. At my age? Why not? You're healthy, sharp, financially secure. What's stopping you from exploring something that's always interested you? She dried her hands slowly on a kitchen towel, considering my question with uncharacteristic openness. I wouldn't know where to begin. I might, I smiled, reaching for my laptop on the counter. Let me show you some options. As we sat at the kitchen island scrolling through certificate programs in interior design and architectural history, I marveled at the reversal of our traditional roles. Now I was the one encouraging her toward creative pursuit, offering practical pathways toward fulfillment beyond financial security. This one has evening classes, I pointed out, highlighting a local university's professional development program. You could start with just one course to see if it resonates. She studied the screen with the same focused attention she'd once given to investment prospectuses, asking thoughtful questions about time commitments and prerequisites. I'll think about it, she said finally, which from Eleanor Chen constituted serious consideration indeed. After she left that evening, I moved through my house, truly mine now in every way, extinguishing candles, straightening cushions, savoring the lingering energy of connection and community. In the living room turned studio, I paused before my vision board, where I'd pinned inspirations and goals when first moving in. Many had already manifested. The garden transformation, career advancement, financial security beyond what I'd imagined possible a year earlier. Others remained works in progress. The basement renovation into a photography darkroom, the guest cottage conversion for visiting artists, the community creative workshop series one hoped to launch. What struck me most powerfully, however, was the evolution of goals I hadn't explicitly articulated when creating the board. Healing family relationships, establishing healthier boundaries, finding authentic connection beyond people-pleasing or rebellion. My phone buzzed with a text from Julian, confirmed with the board, official offer letter coming tomorrow. Say yes, Olivia. We need your vision. The opportunity was everything I could have wished for professionally: creative autonomy, significant compensation, the chance to reshape healthcare communication on a national scale. Yet a year ago I might have hesitated, worried about overreaching, haunted by my mother's predictions of inevitable creative career limitations. Now I typed back without hesitation, looking forward to the details. Let's create something remarkable together. Setting down my phone, I moved to the back deck, drawn by the gentle glow of the garden lighting illuminating the space that had become my sanctuary and social heart. The air carried the scent of late-blooming native flowers and herbs from the kitchen garden, so different from the sterile rose perfume that had once dominated this yard. In the quiet, I reflected on the journey of the past year, from "you'll never own a home" to creating not just a house, but a life rich with meaning, authentic connection, and creative fulfillment. The transformation hadn't happened overnight or without challenges. It had required consistent boundary setting, intentional design choices, and the courage to envision possibilities beyond inherited limitations. The following morning, I woke early to sunlight, filtering through curtains I'd designed myself, a watercolor pattern inspired by my great-grandmother's painting that now hung in a place of honor in my bedroom. My first thought was not of work deadlines or mortgage payments, but of the community workshop proposal I'd been developing, a series of creative sessions hosted in my home for young people from underserved neighborhoods interested in design careers. Over coffee on my deck, I finalized the workshop curriculum, drawing on both my professional expertise and my personal experience of navigating creative pursuits against practical objections. The program would offer not just technical skills, but mentorship in resilience, self-advocacy, and the courage to define success on one's own terms. My phone rang as I was reviewing the budget spreadsheet. To my surprise, it was my mother. "I've been thinking about our conversation," she said without preamble. "About the design program." "Yes?" I prompted when she paused. "I've registered for the introductory course on space planning and residential design theory," she continued, her voice carrying a hint of something I rarely associated with my mother: nervous excitement. "It starts next month, Tuesday evenings." "Mom, that's wonderful," I replied, genuinely pleased by her initiative. "I think you'll excel at it." "We'll see," she said, characteristic caution tempering her enthusiasm. I may be entirely out of my depth, but I thought, well, I'm not getting any younger. If I'm going to explore this interest, now is the time. The echo of my own thinking about the San Francisco opportunity wasn't lost on me. Perhaps we were more alike than either of us had been willing to acknowledge, both driven by perfectionism and a need for security, both harboring creative ambitions that sought expression. "Actually," she continued after a moment, "I was wondering if I might see your studio space again. Your arrangement of work areas and lighting placement was quite instructive. Of course, I agreed, recognizing this request as the bridge-building gesture it was. How about tomorrow afternoon? I have some sketches for the community workshop space I'd value your opinion on as well. The slight intake of breath on the other end of the line told me the significance of my invitation, not just welcoming her into my space, but actively seeking her input on a creative project. I'll bring lunch, she offered. From that Mediterranean place you mentioned last week. After we hung up, I sat for a moment absorbing the continuing evolution of our relationship. The careful steps toward mutual respect, the tentative sharing of genuine interests, the gradual dismantling of the critical parent/rebellious child dynamic that had defined us for decades. Julian's formal offer arrived by email mid-morning, the details even more favorable than our discussions had suggested. The role would allow me to maintain my home base while traveling quarterly to San Francisco, with flexibility to pursue independent projects and speaking engagements. The compensation package included not just substantial salary and benefits, but stock options in their expanding healthcare network. As I reviewed the details, I found myself thinking of all the young designers I'd mentor in my community workshop, especially young women who might be hearing limiting messages about creative career viability from well-meaning but misguided parents or teachers. What might it mean for them to see someone who had defied those limitations, who had built both creative fulfillment and financial security on her own terms? What doors might open in their imagination if they understood that "you'll never own a home" was not a prediction but a challenge to prove wrong? I signed the acceptance letter with a sense of completion that went beyond professional achievement. This milestone represented not just career advancement, but the culmination of a journey toward self-trust, the unshakable knowledge that I could navigate decisions based on my own values rather than inherited fears or external validation. That afternoon, I met with the community center director to discuss hosting my workshop series. As we toured their current facilities, noting limitations and possibilities, I found myself drawing on organizational skills inherited from my mother, alongside creative problem-solving approaches I developed in resistance to her rigid structures. Most of these kids have never been told they could make a living through creative work, the director explained as we discussed potential participants. Their parents want them focused on practical careers: medicine, law, business. I smiled at the familiar narrative. I understand that perspective better than you might think, I acknowledged. But I also know the cost of suppressing creative talents for practical expectations. Sometimes the most practical skill is learning to trust your own voice and vision. That's exactly what these young people need to hear, she nodded approvingly. Someone who's walked that path successfully. As I drove home, I reflected on the concept of success and how profoundly my definition had evolved over the past year. No longer was it measured primarily by financial benchmarks or external validation, though both had arrived beyond my expectations. True success, I had discovered, lay in alignment, creating a life where physical spaces, relationships, work, and personal expression all reflected authentic values rather than imposed expectations. Pulling into my driveway, I experienced again that moment of quiet wonder that still occasionally caught me by surprise. This house, once the embodiment of everything I thought I couldn't have, had become not just my property but my canvas for creating a life of intention and meaning. Inside, I moved through rooms now filled with purposeful beauty rather than sterile perfection. The formal living room where I'd once perched carefully on the edge of pristine furniture now hummed with creative energy as my design studio. The dining room where stilted family meals had been endured now welcomed friends around a table made from reclaimed wood, mismatched vintage chairs, encouraging lingering conversation. In my home office, formerly my mother's impeccable guest room, I finalized details for the community workshop curriculum. The session on financial literacy for creative professionals felt particularly meaningful, a practical toolkit I wished I'd had when navigating early career decisions against a backdrop of skepticism about creative career viability. My phone chimed with a text from Ethan. Got the transfer to the architectural firm's development department, starting next month. Thanks for encouraging me to make the leap. Another circle completing. My brother finding his own path toward integrating creative interests with practical skills, no longer constrained by our mother's narrow definition of acceptable career choices. As evening approached, I prepared for a video call with Julian to discuss transition timelines for the new position. Setting up my laptop in the garden room, a sun porch I'd transformed into a year-round creative thinking space, I caught sight of my reflection in the window glass. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the hesitant, defensive creative who had once internalized limiting beliefs about her capabilities and prospects. This version stood confident in her space, assured of her value, clear about her boundaries and vision. The call with Julian went smoothly, our collaborative energy confirming the rightness of this new professional direction. As we discussed integrating my approach to authentic healthcare communication across their network, I found myself drawing on both the creative instincts I'd always trusted and the strategic thinking I'd developed despite, or perhaps because of, having to constantly justify my creative choices. "Your perspective is exactly what healthcare marketing has been missing," Julian commented as we wrapped up our discussion. "The ability to balance emotional resonance with practical information delivery. It's rare and incredibly valuable." After the call ended, I stepped onto my back deck, watching fireflies rise from the garden as darkness settled. The contrast between this vibrant, living landscape and the sterile showcase it had once been perfectly embodied my journey over the past year. From restriction to authentic expression, from others' expectations to self-defined purpose. My phone lit up with a final text for the day, my mother confirming our lunch appointment for the following afternoon, adding, "Bringing some design magazines I've been studying." Found an article about incorporating personal history into residential spaces that made me think of what you've done with the house. The acknowledgement of my design approach as worthy of professional consideration, rather than dismissal as impractical or indulgent, represented yet another small shift in our evolving relationship. Not dramatic reconciliation, but something more sustainable. Mutual respect developing from genuine recognition of each other's strengths and values. The next morning, I woke with a sense of anticipation about both my mother's visit and the community workshop program now scheduled to begin the following month. As I prepared coffee and organized my studio space for our meeting, I realized how profoundly my relationship with anticipation had changed. Where once the prospect of my mother's assessment had triggered anxiety and defensive preparation, now I felt a calm readiness for exchange. Not perfect agreement, but authentic engagement. The boundaries established by changing the locks had created space for a healthier connection to develop, one based on mutual respect rather than control or rebellion. She arrived precisely on time, as always, but with a new energy about her, a subtle brightness in her expression that I associated with purpose rather than performance. "I brought lunch," she announced, setting down bags from the Mediterranean restaurant, "and these design journals I mentioned." The article on incorporating personal history into living spaces is quite insightful. As we arranged food on plates, hummus and tabbouleh and warm pita, I noticed she'd brought actual serving dishes rather than suggesting we eat from takeout containers. This small gesture toward making our lunch meeting more intentional touched me unexpectedly. "Before we get to the magazines," she said as we settled at my studio work table, "I wanted to show you something." From her immaculate handbag, she withdrew a slender portfolio and placed it carefully between us. Opening it revealed a series of hand-drawn interior sketches, living spaces rendered with surprising skill and imagination. "Are these yours?" I asked, genuinely impressed by their quality and creativity. She nodded, a hint of color touching her cheeks. "From college, before I switched to business administration, I found them in storage while organizing last weekend. I studied the drawings more closely, recognizing elements that had appeared in our family homes over the years, a preference for clean lines and thoughtful spatial flow, unexpected touches of warmth in carefully chosen accent pieces. "These are really good, Mom," I said honestly. "You had a genuine talent for spatial design." "Had?" she questioned, with the ghost of a smile. Past tense already? The gentle challenge in her voice, so different from her former critical corrections, made me laugh. "Have?" I amended. Present and future tense. These fundamental skills don't disappear, they just wait for the right moment to be developed further. We spent the next hour reviewing her vintage sketches alongside contemporary design magazines, discussing how principles of proportion and balance remained constant while aesthetic expressions evolved. The conversation flowed with a natural ease that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Two creatives exchanging perspectives rather than parent and child locked in patterns of criticism and defense. After lunch, I showed her my plans for the community workshop space, how I intended to transform my basement into a flexible teaching environment where young designers could learn technical skills alongside creative confidence. "The lighting needs reconsideration," she observed, studying my layout sketch. "Natural light from those small windows won't be sufficient for color-accurate work." Instead of experiencing her comment as criticism, I recognized the practical insight it contained. "You're right. I've been researching full-spectrum lighting options but haven't found the right solution yet." "I might have some resources," she offered. From the design program orientation materials, they had an excellent section on studio lighting configurations for different purposes. The collaborative exchange continued as we refined the workshop space plans together, her organizational precision complementing my creative vision in ways I wouldn't have thought possible months earlier. As she prepared to leave that afternoon, she paused in the foyer, looking around at the home that had once been hers and was now unquestionably mine. "You've created something remarkable here," she said quietly. "Not just aesthetically, but energetically. It feels alive." The acknowledgement, so simple yet so profound, coming from someone who had once valued control over vitality, appearance over authenticity, meant more than elaborate praise from any design professional. "Thank you," I replied simply. "That was exactly my intention." After she left, I returned to my studio to finalize preparations for my new role with Julian's healthcare network. As I organized portfolio examples and campaign concepts, I realized that this professional evolution paralleled my personal transformation over the past year, both grounded in the courage to trust my own voice and vision rather than internalize others' limiting beliefs. That evening, as twilight settled over my garden, I sat on the deck reflecting on the journey from "you'll never own a home" to this moment of complete belonging, not just in physical space but in my chosen path, my authentic identity, my rightful confidence in both creative and practical capabilities. The house keys rested on the table beside me, no longer symbols of defiance or boundary setting, but simply practical tools for accessing a space that perfectly embodied my values and vision. The locks I'd changed had secured more than property. They had established my authority to determine what constituted success, fulfillment, and purpose in my own life. If you're watching from somewhere dealing with voices that limit your possibilities or define your worth by narrow metrics, remember that sometimes the most powerful response isn't argument or resentment, but quiet, determined action. Create your own definition of success. Establish boundaries that protect your authentic self. And when necessary, change the locks, literally or metaphorically, on anyone whose access to your life diminishes rather than enhances your sense of possibility. True ownership begins not with property, but with the courage to claim your right to define what matters, to transform spaces, relationships, and narratives that no longer serve your authentic vision. The journey from limitation to possibility requires both boundary setting and bridge building, both the courage to say no to inherited expectations and the openness to create new connections based on mutual respect. A year after buying my mother's house and changing the locks, I had discovered that the most meaningful transformation wasn't in the physical structure, but in the internal landscape. The unshakable knowledge that I was the rightful author of my story, the authentic creator of my success, and the true owner of my life's direction. That certainty, more than any property deed or career achievement, represented the most valuable asset I'd acquired, one that could neither be given by someone else's approval nor taken by someone else's doubt. It was mine, permanently and completely, secured by boundaries, as definitive as changed locks, and as liberating as the knowledge that I had always held the key to my own possibilities. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.